I wanted normal intimacy and tried to discuss it with my boyfriend, telling him he should also make an effort. But he was a narcissist who refused to listen, so I completely rethought everything about relationships. Sup Reddit, my name is Elena, and I have to say that life has been pretty wild lately. You know how it is. One minute you're completely head over heels and feeling all lovey-dovey with someone, and the next minute you're lying there wondering if you even truly know the person sleeping right next to you. David and I had what I thought was a solid relationship for about 14 months. It felt like we'd been together forever, but in that comfortable, good way that makes you feel secure and happy. We had developed this easy, natural rhythm between us and shared an unspoken understanding that seemed to make everything flow effortlessly. About 4 months ago, we decided to move in together. It honestly just felt like the most natural next step in our relationship. Everything had been clicking so perfectly between us up to that point. David was incredibly sweet and thoughtful, always planning these little surprise dates that would make my heart flutter. He had this amazing ability to make me laugh constantly, even on my worst days. The chemistry between us was absolutely incredible too. We had that kind of passionate, electric connection where you genuinely can't keep your hands off each other. It was exciting and intense, but at the same time it felt really comfortable and natural, if that makes any sense at all. It was like he completely understood me, and I felt like I understood him on this deep, fundamental level. We functioned like a real team in everything we did. We supported each other, made decisions together, and just seemed to be perfectly in sync. Or at least, that's exactly how I saw things at the time. I truly believed we had something special and lasting. Then everything changed when Victoria started working at my office. She's this incredibly sharp, no-nonsense type of woman who carries herself with an air of confidence that's both intimidating and inspiring at the same time. There's something about her intelligence and directness that immediately drew me to her as a person. We quickly fell into a routine of having lunch together on a regular basis. These weren't just casual workplace conversations either. We would dive deep into discussions about absolutely anything and everything under the sun. Victoria is a passionate feminist who cares deeply about women's rights and empowerment. She speaks with such conviction about issues of autonomy and personal empowerment that it's impossible not to be moved by her words. The more time I spent talking with Victoria, the more she began opening my eyes to perspectives and ideas that I had honestly never really thought about before. We would spend hours discussing the complexities of relationships and power dynamics between partners. She would bring up important topics about consent and what it truly means in practical, everyday situations. As these conversations continued, I found myself starting to see things in my own relationship through a completely different lens. Victoria had this way of framing things that made everything seem so clear and logical. She would say things like, your body, your choice, always, and you don't owe anyone anything, especially not your intimacy. When she put it like that, it made perfect sense to me. I began to ask myself why I should ever feel even the slightest bit of pressure to do something I didn't want to do. Shouldn't my partner respect my boundaries completely, no matter what the circumstances were? These questions started swirling around in my mind more and more frequently. So I really started thinking about it all, taking a hard, honest look at my relationship with David. And when I did, I realized something that was pretty shocking to me. I had to admit that yes, sometimes I did go along with things even when I wasn't totally feeling it in the moment. I would participate in intimate moments just to please David or to keep him happy, or simply because it felt like the expected thing to do in a committed relationship. But Victoria's words had really hit home with me on a deep level. This was my body, my decision, period. There was no room for negotiation or compromise on something so fundamental. I started seeing this whole situation as a form of empowerment, as finally taking real control over my own life and choices. It felt like I was truly practicing consent in the most authentic way possible. It wasn't just about saying yes when I genuinely wanted to anymore. It was also about feeling completely comfortable and confident saying no whenever I didn't feel like it, without any guilt or second-guessing myself. This realization felt absolutely revolutionary to me, like I was finally asserting myself as an independent person for the very first time in my adult life. I was finally putting my own needs and desires first, instead of automatically prioritizing his wants and expectations. It felt like I was becoming the empowered woman I had always wanted to be, but had never quite known how to become. The first few times I said no when David initiated something intimate, I'll admit it felt weird and strange. There was definitely some awkwardness in those moments, that's for sure. But mostly, it felt incredibly powerful and liberating. I remember thinking to myself, yes, I'm setting a clear boundary here, and that's exactly what I should be doing. This felt like healthy, mature behavior to me. This was what I imagined modern progressive relationships were supposed to look like. Partners who respected each other's autonomy and individual choices without question or resentment. When I would decline his advances, David would look a little confused at first. I could see some disappointment flash across his face too, which was understandable. But he would always stop immediately when I said no, without arguing or trying to persuade me otherwise. And I would just think to myself, good, he gets it. He respects me and my choices. I mean, why wouldn't he respect me and my decisions? It's my body after all, and I have the absolute right to decide what happens to it. If I'm not in the mood for intimacy, then I'm simply not in the mood. It really seemed that simple and straightforward to me at the time. What I really believed was that it wasn't about David at all. This was entirely about me and my personal autonomy, my body, my choice, end of story. There wasn't any deeper complexity to it than that basic principle. I remember thinking very clearly about this situation and feeling confident in my approach. This is what a truly respectful, healthy relationship looks like, I told myself. It's a relationship where one person can simply say not tonight to their partner, and the other person just accepts that decision gracefully. No questions asked, no pouting or sulking afterward, and absolutely no attempts to make the other person feel guilty about their choice. That's what real love looks like. That's what genuine understanding between two people is supposed to be. It's about honoring and respecting each other's individual needs and boundaries, even when they might be inconvenient or disappointing in the moment. I was completely convinced that David would be totally on board with this new dynamic in our relationship. I figured he would see how progressive and psychologically healthy this approach was for both of us. I mean, wouldn't any good, supportive partner want their girlfriend to feel completely in control of her own body? Wouldn't he want me to feel empowered and strong as an individual? I thought this was just a natural progression, a natural evolution of our relationship into something more mature and equal. It felt like a sign that we were growing and developing together as a couple, becoming more sophisticated in how we handled intimate matters. I was so confident in this entire approach. I was absolutely sure that I was doing the right thing for both of us, individually and as a partnership. How could David not see that this was ultimately good for our relationship? How could he not appreciate that I was becoming a stronger, more self-aware person? I was certain that any reasonable, loving partner would support this kind of personal growth and boundary setting. It seemed so obvious to me that this was the healthiest possible way forward. Hey, this is David speaking now, and I want to give you my perspective on what was happening during this time. I'm not going to lie here or try to sugarcoat my feelings about the situation. When Elena started saying no all the time to any kind of physical intimacy, it felt like someone had punched me directly in the gut. I mean that literally. It was physically painful in a way that I hadn't expected at all. Now, I want to be clear that this wasn't because I'm some kind of sex addict or anything like that. It wasn't about being obsessed with the physical act itself. The thing is, intimacy had always been a huge part of how Elena and I connected with each other as a couple. It was one of the primary ways we showed affection to one another, how we unwound together after particularly long and stressful days. It wasn't just about the physical aspect, you know. It was about the closeness we shared, that feeling of being genuinely wanted and desired by the person you love most. It was about feeling attractive and appealing to your partner. And suddenly, all of that just completely vanished from our relationship like it had never existed at all. The first few times Elena declined my advances, I really tried my best to be cool and understanding about it. I genuinely made an effort to handle it maturely. She would say something like, "Not tonight, babe, I'm just not in the mood." And I would respond with, "No problem, honey, I totally understand." And I really did try to understand it at first. I told myself reasonable things like, "Okay, she's probably just tired tonight." Or, "She must have had a particularly tough day at work." Or, "Maybe she's dealing with something stressful that I don't know about." I tried to give her the benefit of the doubt and not take it personally. But then it kept happening over and over again. It wasn't just an occasional "not tonight" here and there, which would have been completely normal and understandable. Instead, it became a "not tonight" on most nights of the week. Or I'd hear, I'm not really feeling it right now," practically every single time I tried to initiate any kind of physical connection between us. And each time Elena rejected my advances, it felt like a little piece of me was getting chipped away, bit by bit. The accumulation of these rejections was devastating to my self-esteem and my sense of being valued in the relationship. It started to feel less like she simply wasn't in the mood on any given night, and more like she just wasn't interested in me as a person anymore. My mind began racing with all kinds of troubling questions. Was I doing something fundamentally wrong in our relationship? Had I suddenly become physically unattractive to her for some reason I couldn't understand? Was there possibly someone else in the picture that I didn't know about? These thoughts consumed me constantly. I was trying to figure out what had changed so dramatically between us, and why our connection had shifted so suddenly and completely. I tried to address the situation subtly at first, hoping to get some insight into what was going on. I would ask her things like, "Is everything okay with us, Elena?" Or, "You seem a little distant from me lately. Is there something bothering you?" But she would just brush off my concerns completely every single time. "Everything's fine, David. I'm just busy with work, you know," she would say dismissively. But it definitely didn't feel fine to me at all. It felt like there was this invisible wall being constructed between us, brick by brick, day after day, and I had no idea how to tear it down or even understand why it was being built. The constant rejections really started to mess with my head in a serious way. I would come home from work each day, and instead of looking forward to seeing Elena, to cuddling together on the couch, to just being physically close and connected, I began to dread those moments completely. I dreaded that inevitable moment when I might reach for her hand or try to pull her close to me, only to have her pull away from me like I was some kind of unwelcome stranger. It was emotionally exhausting in every possible way you can imagine. It's one thing to be rejected by your partner once in a while. That's just normal life in any relationship. But it's something entirely different to feel like you're constantly walking on eggshells, just waiting for the next rejection to come and crush your spirits all over again. At some point, the constant rejection stopped feeling like Elena was simply setting a healthy boundary. Instead, they started feeling like a complete dismissal of me as a person, as a partner, and as someone worthy of desire and affection. And yeah, I got frustrated beyond belief about the entire situation. Actually, frustrated doesn't even begin to cover it. I got deeply resentful about what was happening between us. Here I was, genuinely trying to be the supportive, understanding boyfriend. I was making every effort to respect her perspective, to give her the space she seemed to need, and to honor her choices without complaint. But what about my needs in all of this? What about my feelings of rejection and inadequacy? What about the emotional pain I was experiencing from being constantly turned away by the person I loved most? It felt like our relationship had become a completely one-sided street, where only Elena's feelings and preferences mattered. She was asserting her right to say no whenever she wanted, which fine, I understood that in theory, and I wasn't trying to argue with that principle. But what about my right to feel loved and desired by my partner in the ways that we had always connected before? What about the partnership aspect of this relationship that we had built together? So eventually I just stopped trying altogether. I mean, what was even the point of putting myself out there emotionally anymore? Why should I continue setting myself up to be rejected again and again, day after day? Why should I bother planning a romantic dinner, lighting candles, putting on soft music and creating a beautiful atmosphere when the most fundamental part of our physical connection was completely off the table? It felt like I was putting tremendous effort into a relationship that wasn't giving anything meaningful back to me, at least not in the ways that mattered most to me personally. And for me, physical intimacy is a huge part of what makes a romantic relationship actually feel like a relationship, rather than just a friendly cohabitation arrangement. It's not just about existing in the same physical space together. A real partnership requires mutual effort, mutual desire, and mutual giving from both people involved. I started pulling back from the relationship, though it wasn't a conscious decision at first. It was more like an instinct kicking in, a self-preservation mechanism that I didn't even realize was happening initially. If Elena wasn't interested in that kind of closeness and connection with me, then why should I keep initiating everything else in our relationship? Why should I keep planning those elaborate, thoughtful dates that used to make her so happy? Why should I continue putting energy into romantic gestures when the romantic spark between us felt like it was slowly dying? Why should I bother buying flowers for her when they would just sit there as a painful reminder of what felt missing from our connection? I want to be clear that this wasn't me trying to be petty or vindictive toward Elena. I wasn't trying to get back at her for anything she had done. This was me protecting my own heart and my own rapidly dwindling enthusiasm for our relationship. I simply couldn't keep pouring myself into something that felt like a bottomless pit of unreciprocated effort and emotional energy. I guess you could say that I started to emotionally distance myself from the situation. It's not like I stopped loving Elena completely or anything that dramatic, but that deep feeling of being truly connected to her, of being genuine partners in this relationship together, began to fade away slowly but surely. When you feel constantly rejected in one crucial area of your relationship, it inevitably starts to bleed into other areas as well. You begin questioning absolutely everything about the relationship and your place in it. Is she even happy with me anymore? Does she even want to be with me anymore? These doubts creep in and take root in your mind. My view has always been that a healthy relationship is fundamentally a two-way street. It requires consistent effort from both sides to work properly and sustainably. If one person is constantly saying no to something that's genuinely important to their partner, then how can the other person be expected to keep giving their absolute all in every other aspect of the relationship? It just doesn't work like that in practice. It can't work like that long term because eventually the person who's constantly giving will burn out completely. I couldn't believe what I was seeing when Elena finally reacted to my behavior change. I just couldn't believe what was happening between us and how she was processing the situation. It had been weeks, maybe even more than a month at that point since I had planned anything special for us as a couple. There were no more surprise dinners at nice restaurants that I knew she loved. No more suggestions for romantic weekend getaways to the mountains that we used to enjoy together. All of those thoughtful little gestures that I used to do regularly had completely stopped. I was no longer bringing her coffee in bed in the morning like I used to do every weekend. I stopped leaving sweet little notes on her desk at work that would make her smile during stressful days. There was nothing romantic happening in our relationship at all anymore. The flowers stopped coming completely, and our date nights had dwindled down to almost nothing. When we did manage to go out together occasionally, it felt like Elena was the one doing all the suggesting, all the planning and organizing of our activities. But even those rare occasions felt flat and completely lifeless, lacking any of the spark or excitement that our outings used to have. And honestly, this dramatic change in my behavior was driving Elena absolutely nuts. I could see the frustration building in her day by day. What had happened to the guy who used to court her so enthusiastically? Where was the David who had been so eager and passionate about making our relationship special and romantic? From her perspective, it must have felt like I had just given up entirely on us, like I wasn't even trying anymore to be a good partner to her. And the more Elena thought about this change in my behavior, the angrier she became about the whole situation. How could I just switch off like that, she wondered. Did I think she wouldn't notice such a dramatic change in how I treated her? Did I really think it wouldn't bother her at all that I had stopped putting any effort into the romantic side of our relationship? So one night, Elena decided she just had to say something about what was happening. We were sitting on the couch together, watching some mindless television show, and there was this heavy, uncomfortable silence hanging between us that felt like it was screaming at both of us. I felt the frustration that had been building inside me for weeks finally bubbling up to the surface, and I knew I had to address what was happening between us. I tried to keep my voice steady and controlled as I started to lay everything out for David, but I could hear that I sounded sharper and more confrontational than I had originally intended. I couldn't hold back my feelings anymore about how dramatically he had changed. David just seemed like a completely different person now, someone I barely recognized. He looked at me with what appeared to be surprise when I started speaking, and then he seemed to just shrug off my concerns like they didn't matter at all. I felt like he was dismissing my feelings entirely, and that reaction only made me angrier about everything that had been happening. My frustration was rising quickly as I tried to explain how his behavior was affecting me. It felt much more like David was just existing next to me in our apartment, rather than actively participating in our relationship as an equal partner. I kept thinking to myself, where's the effort that used to be there? Where's all the romance that we used to share together? It truly felt like he was deliberately punishing me for something, though I couldn't understand what I had possibly done wrong. I mean, what else could explain such a dramatic change in his behavior? He was intentionally withdrawing his affection and romantic attention from me because I wasn't giving him exactly what he wanted when he wanted it. It felt so unfair and frankly childish to me. I had been completely clear about setting my boundaries properly. I had explained to him multiple times that my body, my choice, was about my fundamental autonomy as a person, about practicing healthy consent in our relationship. Shouldn't he just respect that completely and unconditionally? Shouldn't he understand that my personal choices about my own body had absolutely nothing to do with how much I loved him or how much I wanted him to continue being romantic and attentive toward me? I expected David to be mature about this entire situation, to support me unconditionally in asserting my rights. That's what a good, supportive partner does, right? They stand by you no matter what circumstances arise. They understand your needs and respect your decisions, especially when you're asserting something as fundamental as bodily autonomy. I just couldn't wrap my head around why David would stop trying with me and putting effort into our relationship. My choices about intimacy were my personal choices, and they shouldn't have any impact whatsoever on his efforts in all the other areas of our relationship. He should still be doing all those wonderful things that made me feel special and cherished, taking me out on dates, planning romantic surprises, making me feel like the center of his world. That's what a healthy relationship is supposed to look like, regardless of any other factors. You simply can't just stop being romantic and attentive to your partner because they're not always in the mood for physical intimacy. These were completely separate aspects of our relationship that had nothing to do with each other. I genuinely felt like I was making a perfectly reasonable demand of him. I thought I was explaining the situation so clearly that any rational person would understand. My needs in the relationship hadn't changed at all from what they had always been. I still wanted and needed the romance, the courtship, the constant feeling of being cherished and loved by my partner. It was David's job as my boyfriend to provide that emotional support and romantic attention, regardless of my personal boundaries around physical intimacy. These were two entirely different things that shouldn't be connected in any way. I needed him to go back to exactly how he used to be with me. I needed him to put all that effort back into our relationship, to start planning things again, to be romantic and thoughtful like he had been before. This situation wasn't fair to me at all, and I couldn't understand why he was making it so complicated. I really didn't think I was asking for too much from him. I just wanted him to actually try again, to show me that he cared about making me happy. I fully expected David to apologize when I finished explaining everything to him. I thought he would look a little ashamed of his behavior and then promise to do better going forward. I really did expect that kind of reaction from him. I thought he would immediately agree with my perspective because what I was asking for seemed so completely reasonable and fair. It was completely separate from my boundaries around intimacy, which he should respect without question. I thought David would see that I was absolutely right about this situation, and that his withdrawal from romantic gestures was petty and completely uncalled for. But he didn't react the way I expected at all. Instead of apologizing or looking ashamed, he just sat there looking at me with his face completely unmoving and calm. And then he started to explain his perspective on everything that had been happening between us. What he said next totally blindsided me in a way I never could have anticipated. I had been mentally prepared for an argument. I was ready for him to admit that he was wrong and had been behaving badly. But I was not prepared for this at all. I wasn't ready for him to actually resist my reasoning and push back against what I thought was such a clear and logical position. David began speaking slowly at first, but I could hear this growing clarity and conviction in his voice as he continued. Elena had been laying it all out right there on the couch, telling me that I wasn't trying anymore, that I had completely checked out of our relationship, and that I was being petty about everything that was happening between us. As I listened to her speak and make her case, my mind was racing, connecting dots and pieces of information that I hadn't fully put together before. I was finally seeing the whole picture snap into place with startling clarity. It wasn't about me being petty or vindictive, not really, not at the core of what was happening. This was about something much bigger and more fundamental than Elena was seeing or understanding. I looked at her sitting there, and it hit me like a physical blow. It truly hit me hard, this realization that had been building for weeks. She was talking about my efforts, my romantic gestures, my enthusiasm for planning special things for us. She wanted me to keep giving and giving, keep planning elaborate dates and surprises, keep making her feel special and cherished. And she expected all of this no matter what else was happening in our relationship. But what was she actually giving in return, really? At least in the ways that mattered most to me and had always been important in a relationship like ours had been. So I started speaking to Elena, slowly at first, but with this growing sense of clarity about what I needed to say. I tried to explain to her that just like she had her moods and feelings about her body and what she was up for on any given day, I had my own moods too. I had my own feelings about romance, about putting myself out there emotionally, about planning those special dinners and surprises that she loved so much. My desire to do those romantic things for her, my enthusiasm for creating special moments between us. It wasn't some endless wellspring that never ran dry. It was fed by how I felt in our relationship overall, by how wanted and desired I felt as her partner. When that feeling started to disappear, everything else was affected too. I mean, she had spent weeks consistently saying no to physical intimacy between us. Every single time she rejected my advances, there was this little sting of rejection, this feeling of being unwanted and undesired. And it chipped away at me bit by bit, day after day, until I felt completely disconnected from her. She was absolutely right about one thing. It was her body, her choice, completely and without question. I had tried my best to respect that principle, to understand her perspective and support her decisions without complaint or argument. But if she had the fundamental right to say no to me, to decline a way that we had always connected as a couple, then didn't I have a similar right? Didn't I have the right to feel a certain way about that rejection? Didn't I have the right to have my enthusiasm for grand romantic gestures naturally wane when I felt constantly rebuffed in such a fundamental part of our relationship? It wasn't about control or punishment, like she seemed to think it was. This was about balance, about the basic human dynamics of give and take that exist in any healthy relationship. If her decision to say no meant that she wasn't in the mood for physical intimacy, then my feelings, my disappointment, My growing sense of rejection meant that I wasn't in the mood for elaborate romantic planning. Why should my mood for showering her with dates and surprises be any less valid than her mood for intimacy? Both were genuine expressions of desire and connection. And if one half of that equation was consistently absent from our relationship, then the other half would naturally suffer as a result. I told Elena clearly and directly that I respected her choices absolutely and completely. Her body, her choice. That was her fundamental right as a person, and I would never argue with that principle or try to undermine it in any way. But that same principle, that same respect for individual choice and autonomy, had to apply to me as well. If Elena could choose how she wanted to engage physically in our relationship based on her feelings and moods, then I could choose how I wanted to engage romantically based on how I felt in the relationship overall. This wasn't about keeping score in some petty game of tit for tat. It wasn't about being vindictive or trying to punish her for her decisions. This was about the emotional energy and willingness to invest deeply in our relationship. That energy simply wasn't there for me anymore, at least not at the same level it had been before. The reason was that I felt consistently emotionally disconnected from Elena and rejected in a way that mattered deeply to me as her partner. When someone you love constantly turns away from you in such a fundamental aspect of your connection, it affects everything else about how you feel in that relationship. I laid it all out for Elena as completely and honestly as I could. If she found my approach unreasonable, if she thought my feelings were somehow less valid than hers, then maybe we weren't on the same page about what a relationship actually was supposed to be. Maybe we needed to seriously reevaluate everything about what we were doing together. I wasn't trying to be mean or hurtful to her, but I had to be completely honest about where I stood on this issue. I told her straight up that if she couldn't understand my perspective, if she couldn't see my side of this situation, then she was free to leave our relationship. That might sound harsh when I say it like that, but I felt like I had to draw a clear line somewhere. I couldn't keep pouring my emotional energy into what felt like an empty well. I couldn't continue giving everything I had to someone who wasn't willing to give back in the ways that mattered to me. For me, love, real, genuine love, was about mutual giving between two people. It was about both partners actively investing in the relationship and making each other feel wanted and valued in the ways that were important to them individually. A healthy relationship wasn't about one person constantly giving while the other person withheld what was important to their partner. It wasn't about one person dictating all the terms of affection and intimacy while expecting the other person to just keep performing and delivering romantic gestures on demand. That simply wasn't how a real partnership worked, at least not for me. I couldn't go back to how things had been before, not if nothing else was going to change about our dynamic. I wasn't going to pretend that I was overflowing with romantic energy and gestures when I felt emotionally starved and disconnected in our relationship. It just wasn't sustainable for me to continue like that. The imbalance was too great, and the emotional cost was too high for me to bear long term. It was Elena's turn to really think deeply about what my body, my choice actually meant, not just for her individually, but for both of us as partners in this relationship. Did that principle apply equally to both of our feelings, both of our emotional states, and both of our capacities to give to each other? That was the real challenge I was putting in front of her. That was the fundamental question she needed to answer for herself if we were going to move forward together. David's words hit me like a physical blow to my chest, not because he had yelled at me or even raised his voice in anger, but because of the cold, hard logic that was embedded in everything he was saying to me. My mood about intimacy, his mood about romance. It was like someone had held up a mirror directly in front of my face, and I absolutely didn't like what I saw reflected back at me. For 4 entire days after that conversation, David's words just replayed in my head over and over again like a broken record. I tried desperately to argue with his logic internally, of course. I kept telling myself things like, but it's different. And my body, my choice. That's a fundamental human right. And his mood about planning a date isn't the same thing as my autonomy over my own body. I went through all the arguments and talking points that Victoria and I had discussed extensively. I reminded myself of all the ways I was supposed to be empowered by asserting my boundaries and taking control of my choices. But every time I tried to dismiss David's perspective, I kept circling back to his quiet, measured words. If she could choose how she wanted to engage physically, then I could choose how I wanted to engage romantically based on how I felt in the relationship. It started to sink in slowly at first, and then with this awful, undeniable clarity that I couldn't escape or rationalize away. I had been so completely focused on my right to say no, so invested in asserting my boundaries and autonomy, that I hadn't even considered the real impact of those constant rejections on David as a person. I hadn't thought about how it affected his feelings, his sense of being desired and wanted. or his motivation to put effort into other aspects of our relationship. I had expected him to be this endless well of romantic gestures, constantly pouring out love and attention and thoughtful surprises, even while I was consistently shutting down what he clearly saw as a significant part of our connection. That's when the double standard in my thinking smacked me right in the face with brutal clarity. I had been expecting David to give, and give some more, unconditionally, regardless of my choices and regardless of how those choices made him feel. But I wasn't giving back to him in return, at least not in a way that he clearly valued and needed from our relationship. I had been expecting him to understand and respect my not-in-the-mood responses without question, but I wasn't extending that same understanding and empathy to his emotional state. I wasn't considering his dwindling mood for grand romantic gestures, which was a direct result of feeling rejected and unwanted by me. How could I demand unconditional support for my choices while only offering conditional intimacy in return? The relationship had become incredibly lopsided, and I was the one who had created that imbalance. The more I thought about this realization, the more I understood that Victoria's advice, while powerful and empowering in theory, had inadvertently led me down a path of complete imbalance in my relationship. All of her guidance had been focused entirely on my needs, my boundaries, and my autonomy as an individual. And while those things are absolutely important and valid, they simply can't exist in a vacuum when you're in a committed partnership with another person. A healthy relationship isn't just two people asserting their individual rights and boundaries without any consideration for their partner. It's about two people choosing to come together, to give and take from each other, to understand each other's needs on a deep level, and to find a way to meet those needs mutually and sustainably. True empowerment, I was starting to realize, wasn't just about what I could say no to or what boundaries I could set. It was also about what I was willing to contribute to our relationship and how I could foster a healthy, reciprocal connection with the person I claimed to love. The weight of this realization, the sheer unfairness of my stance and expectations, just crushed me completely. I felt overwhelmed by the understanding of how selfish and one-sided I had been. All the defensiveness I had felt about my position melted away entirely. It was replaced by this overwhelming feeling of guilt and regret that settled deep in my chest. I had been so caught up in being right about my principles, so invested in asserting my modern womanhood and autonomy, that I had completely overlooked how much I was hurting the person I loved most. David had been nothing but supportive of me throughout our entire relationship. He had respected my choices without argument, even when they clearly caused him pain. And in return, I had been asking for a completely one-way street, expecting him to keep filling my emotional tank while I left his completely empty. I could see it now, clear as day, how unfair and unsustainable my expectations had been. I had been asking for a relationship where I got to dictate all the terms while he was supposed to just accept whatever I was willing to give, no matter how little that was. I knew immediately that I had to talk to David about this. I had to make this right somehow, if it was even possible at this point. I approached him with my heart pounding in my chest, feeling nervous and ashamed of how I had behaved. I just said everything that was in my heart. All of it. I told him that I was genuinely sorry, truly and deeply sorry for how I had treated him and our relationship. I explained that I finally understood how unfair I had been to him and how I had completely overlooked his feelings and his needs while focusing only on my own desires and boundaries. I admitted to him that I had expected him to keep trying and giving romantically, regardless of how my constant rejections made him feel, and that this expectation was completely wrong of me. I told David that I could finally see the double standard in my thinking and behavior. I finally understood what he had meant about reciprocity and balance in our relationship. His feelings, his moods, and his desire to give romantic gestures were just as valid and important as my feelings about physical intimacy. I explained to him that I didn't want our relationship to continue being so one-sided and imbalanced. I wanted what we had before, that natural balance, that easy connection where both of us felt valued and desired. I wanted us to be real partners again, truly equal partners who considered each other's needs and feelings. This was a huge, humbling realization for me, but it was also an incredible relief in many ways. It felt like a heavy burden had been lifted from my shoulders because now I could see a path forward. Maybe we could actually fix what had gone wrong between us. I knew it wouldn't be instant or easy. I understood that trust takes time to rebuild, especially when it's been damaged by weeks of imbalance and hurt feelings. But I felt this new understanding settle deeply within me, a much deeper sense of what mutual respect and genuine partnership actually meant in practice. It meant considering both of us, both our choices and both our needs, every step of the way in our relationship. It meant understanding that my autonomy was important, but so was his emotional well-being. It meant recognizing that my right to say no was valid, but so was his right to feel less motivated when he felt consistently rejected. And most importantly, I was ready to try again. I was ready to really try together to rebuild what we had lost and to create something even better than what we'd had before. I was ready to be the partner that David deserved, someone who gave as much as she received, someone who considered his feelings as carefully as she considered her own. This experience taught me that true empowerment in a relationship isn't about asserting your individual rights at the expense of your partner's feelings. It's about finding a way to honor both people's needs and creating a dynamic where both partners feel valued, desired, and respected. It's about understanding that love is indeed a two-way street and that both people need to actively participate in making each other feel cherished and wanted. I learned that boundaries are important, but so is generosity of spirit. Autonomy matters, but so does consideration for the person you've chosen to build a life with.